My name is Maya Green, and if someone had told me 5 years ago that my husband would try to steal everything from me, our home, our savings, even our children, I would have laughed. Back then, I was still clinging to the version of him I married, not the stranger who now sat across the breakfast table with his eyes on his phone and his heart somewhere else. I'm 38, a licensed clinical psychologist with a private practice in Seattle. I specialize in trauma recovery and emotional regulation, which makes what happened to me all the more ironic. I've spent years helping people rebuild after betrayal, coaching them through divorces, abusive partners, manipulative exes. I thought I could spot those red flags from a mile away. I thought I was immune. Turns out, even the best of us can be blind when it comes to the people we love. It started with a receipt, just a little folded square of paper wedged inside one of my psychology textbooks. I was in my home office preparing for a client session when it slipped out and floated to the floor. It was from a high-end jeweler, dated 2 months prior, for a $12,000 necklace. My birthday had come and gone. Our anniversary too. And Daniel, my husband of 12 years, had given me nothing but a "sorry, work's been insane." The necklace wasn't for me. I didn't confront him, not right away. When you've counseled enough survivors of infidelity and financial abuse, you learn, never act without a plan. I quietly started digging. I knew his passwords. I checked credit card statements, bank transfers, emails. What I found made my skin crawl. Secret charges. Shell companies. Large wire transfers to offshore accounts I never knew existed. Over $3 million, hidden. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. This wasn't a man preparing for retirement. This was a man preparing for escape. Daniel Green worked in commercial real estate and had been doing too well 4 years. He traveled often, claimed to be scouting properties or wooing investors. In reality, he'd been funneling our assets away while I stayed home, raised the kids, and built a business. He used to joke that I was the heart of the family while he was the brain. I finally understood what he meant. I contacted a lawyer the next morning, Rachel Cohen, an old friend who owed me a favor. We met at a coffee shop under the guise of a casual catch-up, and I told her everything. She immediately brought in Elise, a forensic accountant whose calm demeanor hid the instincts of a shark. Elise combed through Daniel's accounts with surgical precision. "He's been planning this for years," she told me. "If you hadn't caught it now, you and your kids would have ended up with nothing." Our kids, Lena, 10, and Max, 8, were my everything. I didn't cry, not even when I realized how deep the betrayal ran. I didn't scream. I just focused. I stopped sleeping. Stopped eating. I stayed up late at the kitchen island, poring over spreadsheets while the kids slept upstairs. I logged every transaction. Every email. Every late-night call he thought I didn't notice. 3 weeks later, I served him divorce papers. Daniel looked at them like they were a joke. "Is this about the girl?" he asked casually, sipping his coffee. Just like that. Like I should be flattered he even admitted there was one. I didn't flinch. "No," I said. "This is about everything." What he didn't know was that I had already frozen our joint assets through an emergency court motion Rachel filed in secret. Elise had uncovered every hidden dollar. And I had the emotional profile of the man sitting across from me, narcissistic, manipulative, emotionally neglectful. My years of clinical training had taught me exactly how to dismantle men like him. Still, Daniel didn't go down easy. He told our friends I was unstable, overworked. Told my mother I was having a breakdown. He even suggested I check into a wellness retreat for clarity. When that didn't work, he went nuclear, filed for full custody of the kids, claimed I was mentally unfit due to unresolved trauma from my own childhood, and quoted passages from a memoir I'd published about surviving emotional abuse. He tried to use my own words against me. That was the moment I stopped hoping for peace. I started documenting everything. His absences. His volatility. The way he shouted at Max for spilling juice. The night he missed Lena's school recital and blamed me for not reminding him. I logged every slight, every lie, every manipulation. I built a file like I was preparing a court-ordered psychological assessment, except this time, the subject wasn't a client. It was my husband. By the time we walked into court for the first hearing, my file was 2 inches thick. Rachel looked at me and said, "You've done more work than most PIs." I smiled for the first time in weeks. Daniel showed up in a tailored suit, wearing his usual smug grin. He thought this was going to be easy. He thought I was still the woman who let things slide. He didn't know I had become something else entirely. He thought I was fighting for half. He didn't know I was fighting to expose every lie he'd ever told, and I was just getting started. If you've never been through a divorce from a man who's hiding millions and playing the victim at the same time, let me tell you, it's less like a courtroom drama and more like a psychological war. The morning of our preliminary hearing, I wore a simple navy dress, minimal makeup, and flats instead of heels. My lawyer, Rachel, advised I look capable but not aggressive, calm but not meek. It was ridiculous that women had to dress like they were walking a tightrope just to be taken seriously, but I knew how perception worked. I'd coached enough clients through family court to know the smallest things could sway a judge's gut. Daniel, on the other hand, walked in like he was heading to a board meeting. Polished suit, Rolex on display, and that fake humility he used when he was pitching deals. He even nodded and smiled at me, like we were just old acquaintances crossing paths at brunch. I didn't acknowledge him. I was already in character, clinical, composed, and focused. Let him play the part of the wronged husband. I had facts. The judge was a silver-haired woman in her 60s with a reputation for hating drama and loving evidence. Perfect. Rachel introduced our request for temporary custody and filed a formal objection to Daniel's attempt to sell the beach house he'd forgotten to disclose in his initial asset statement. Elise, our forensic accountant, had traced the wire transfer he used to purchase it, an LLC created in Delaware, financed with company funds labeled operating expenses. Daniel had always said his company was just him and a few contractors. But it was much more than that. His lawyer tried to paint me as a bitter wife trying to punish a successful man for moving on. Dr. Green, he said, stressing the title with a hint of sarcasm, has made it clear that she wishes to make this divorce as painful and public as possible. I didn't flinch. I simply passed Rachel a file I'd prepared in the early hours of the morning, a timeline of Daniel's financial manipulation, complete with evidence of asset transfers, undeclared properties, and a pattern of corporate fraud that should have raised red flags years ago. Rachel dropped it on the table with a thud. The judge raised an eyebrow and began flipping through the pages. Daniel's smile faltered. He hadn't expected me to be 3 steps ahead. He didn't realize I wasn't out for revenge, I was out for the truth, and the law was finally listening. We were granted temporary primary custody, and Daniel was ordered to submit a full financial disclosure within 10 business days, under oath. That was the first real crack in his foundation. Back at home, the kids were adjusting. Lena kept asking if Daddy was going to move away forever, and Max just wanted to know if we'd still get pizza on Fridays. I didn't tell them what was happening. Not yet. I just held them tighter each night and told them we were safe. But inside, I was boiling. I needed more than courtroom wins. I needed insurance. Leverage. That's when I made a decision that some would consider morally gray. One of Daniel's former assistants, Emily, reached out to me. She had heard about the divorce through mutual connections and wanted to talk, said she had something I needed to see. We met at a quiet bistro downtown, and she brought an old laptop wrapped in a scarf. He made me erase all of it, she said. But I saved a backup. Just in case. The laptop was a treasure trove of buried secrets. Emails between Daniel and a shady financial advisor in the Caymans. Fake invoices. Internal memos from his company instructing contractors to inflate costs and bill extra hours on development projects that never broke ground. He wasn't just hiding money. He was committing serious fraud, and he was doing it through real estate deals using client funds. If this went public, Daniel wouldn't just lose the divorce. He'd lose everything. I didn't run straight to the authorities. Not yet. That wasn't the move. I needed the timing to be perfect. For now, I made copies, digital and physical, and stored them in a secure drive, separate from my home network. The pressure started to mount. Daniel's team was stalling in court, filing motion after motion to delay proceedings. He offered settlements twice, both insulting. The first included barely a third of our known marital assets, no spousal support, and split custody with alternating weeks. The second included slightly more cash, but only if I signed a non-disclosure agreement. That one made me laugh out loud. It was clear he still thought he could bully or buy his way out of this. He didn't know who he was dealing with. During this time, I began to notice something strange. Some of Daniel's clients, investors, contractors, even old college buddies he used to golf with, were reaching out to me. Quietly. Off the record. They weren't just checking in. They were nervous. One of them, a man named Rick Saunders, who had invested over $400,000 into one of Daniel's developments, asked me over coffee, "Is it true he's pulling money from the LLC to buy himself property?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. My silence told him everything. The word was getting out. Daniel's empire wasn't as solid as he pretended. His partners were growing wary, his staff were quitting, and his lawyers were getting snippy in emails. The cracks were widening. And then, he made his biggest mistake. He tried to bribe my assistant. I walked into my office one morning and found Nicole, my rock throughout this entire ordeal, sitting pale-faced at my desk, holding a gift bag with a Rolex inside. No note. Just a business card. Daniel's. "He offered me a job," she whispered. "Said you were unstable and it wouldn't be long before your practice folded. He said he'd double my salary." I didn't yell. I didn't scream. I just took the watch, walked to the sink in the kitchenette, and dropped it in the garbage disposal. Then I called Rachel. It was time to hit back, hard. It started with a leak. Not a full-blown exposé, not a headline-grabbing revelation, just a whisper in the right ear. I knew Daniel's business empire wasn't just built on contracts and investments. It was built on perception. Reputation. A facade of integrity and power that made people trust him with millions. So I didn't need to destroy his company outright, not yet. I just needed to shake the pillars holding it up. The first call I made was to Rick Saunders, the investor who had asked about Daniel's shady practices. I emailed him an encrypted folder. No explanation. No names. Just a clean package labeled, "For your consideration." The next day, Rick forwarded the documents to 2 other investors. Then those 2 forwarded it to 4 more. By the end of the week, I'd received 3 anonymous tips from whistleblowers who had worked on Daniel's flagship project in Nevada, the one that supposedly broke ground in 2021 but never even secured a building permit. I wasn't just gaining information anymore. I was gaining allies. Back in court, Daniel had started to unravel. He showed up late to a deposition, snapping at his lawyer and visibly sweating through his shirt. When questioned under oath about the Cayman Islands wire transfers, he stuttered and claimed those weren't personal accounts, despite the email we had showing him directing the funds for a down payment on a villa. Rachel stayed calm, clinical, patient, the kind of patient that makes sharks nervous. Outside the courthouse, reporters had begun sniffing around. A freelance journalist, someone I had quietly tipped off weeks earlier, emailed me asking if I would confirm a rumor about Daniel's offshore holdings. I didn't answer. But I didn't deny it either. The rumor mill had officially started turning. Daniel tried to retaliate the only way he knew how, through our children. He filed for emergency custody, claiming I was mentally unstable and unfit to parent due to emotional volatility and questionable associations. He even dug up a client I'd had 5 years ago, a man who'd been involuntarily committed for suicidal ideation, and twisted the case notes to make it look like I'd enabled him. It backfired. Hard. Rachel presented an affidavit from the man himself, now healthy and thriving, who described my therapy as life-saving and Daniel's actions as manipulative, dangerous, and grossly unethical. The judge dismissed the emergency petition in under 10 minutes. But that moment, it was personal. That was when something inside me shifted. This wasn't just about divorce anymore. This was about character assassination. About protecting my children from a man who would burn down the house just to win. So I went further. Emily, Daniel's former assistant, agreed to go on record. She signed a sworn affidavit and provided video testimony about how Daniel had instructed her to fabricate invoices, bury client complaints, and reroute funds. She also revealed something new: a safe deposit box in Manhattan under a shell company name that Daniel used to store confidential documents, flash drives, and luxury watches. With Rachel's help and a subpoena, we obtained access to the box. Inside were two things that changed everything. First, a USB drive labeled Insurance, Bracket Holdings. It contained backups of Daniel's communications with at least 3 government contractors, all of whom had been overbilled, possibly defrauded, under a real estate procurement scheme he ran through a partner firm. This wasn't just marital fraud. It was criminal. Second, a prenuptial agreement. Only, it wasn't the one I'd signed. The document in the safe was an altered version, same date, same signatures, but the terms were vastly different. In the version I remembered signing, assets earned after marriage were shared equally. In this version, everything Daniel earned through independent entities remained solely his. That alone would have tilted the entire divorce settlement in his favor, if I hadn't found the real version locked away in my therapist's safe 10 months earlier. He was planning to use the fake version in court. That was fraud. That was jail time. When I confronted him, not in private, but in mediation with both legal teams present, I laid it all out. The safe deposit box. The altered prenup. The USB drive. And I told him, in front of everyone, the only reason you're not in handcuffs right now is because I haven't made the call. He said nothing. Just stared at me, eyes wide and bloodless, as if he were seeing me for the first time. And maybe he was. Because I wasn't the woman he married anymore, the one who supported his ambitions, made excuses for his secrets, and cleaned up his messes. That woman was gone. Now? I was the woman he underestimated. And I was only getting started. By the time fall came around, Daniel was bleeding credibility. Not financially, at least not yet. Outwardly, he still drove the matte black Porsche, still posted inspirational quotes over skyline selfies, still walked into the courthouse with that smug, tailored confidence he wore like armor. But inside the walls of his empire, the cracks were spreading like wildfire. Whispers turned to murmurs. Murmurs turned to silence. And then, people started jumping ship. I was sitting in my office when I got the call. It was Rachel. "Brace yourself," she said, barely able to contain the glee in her voice. One of Daniel's senior partners just filed a motion to separate their business entities. He's claiming Daniel committed fraud on multiple joint ventures. I blinked. Wait, Kevin? His best friend since college? Yup. Kevin signed an affidavit stating he was intentionally misled about company assets and had grave concerns about investor exposure. He's protecting himself before the lawsuits come raining down. I leaned back in my chair, heart racing. That was it. The unraveling had begun. The very next day, Daniel's firm was served with an IRS audit notice. 2 more whistleblowers came forward. A journalist, one I'd connected with months earlier through an encrypted drop, published a preliminary article outlining alleged inconsistencies in Daniel's company filings. He hadn't named Daniel directly yet, but the piece went viral. And anyone who'd done business with him knew exactly who it was about. Daniel tried to spin it. He went on LinkedIn, posting some nonsense about growing pains and false accusations by a disgruntled ex. His inner circle rallied, or tried to. But the comments under his post? Brutal. One investor wrote, "So this is why my distribution hasn't arrived in 2 quarters. Another chimed in, pretty bold to talk about trust when your Cayman account matches mine. The illusion was gone. At home, my kids started to notice the change too. Daniel had gone from the weekend fun dad with big promises to a jittery, distracted mess. He missed both of their parent-teacher conferences. Cancelled his weekend with them last minute, claiming he had a business emergency. Even Ava, my youngest, asked me one night, "Why is Daddy always mad at his phone now?" I didn't have the heart to explain what ego collapse looked like. But what rattled me the most wasn't the professional fallout, it was the way Daniel began to fray in person. During our next court session, he was unrecognizable. Gone was the confident negotiator, the guy who always had a smirk and a counteroffer. He looked nervous, pale, defensive. His lawyer tried to suggest a settlement, a rushed one. A lowball offer that assumed I'd be too tired to keep fighting. But they didn't know me. This wasn't about the money anymore. Not really. This was about accountability. About showing my kids, and maybe myself, that manipulation doesn't win in the end. That justice, while slow and brutal, can be served cold. So I rejected the offer. And then I handed Rachel the final folder, the one I'd kept until the moment was just right. It contained testimony from a former accountant of Daniel's who'd been quietly watching the storm. She'd reached out to me under a fake name, wanting to stay anonymous at first. But when she realized I was collecting proof, she came forward. In that folder were screenshots, receipts, and internal reports showing Daniel had intentionally underreported earnings during the marriage, hidden proceeds from 3 lucrative real estate flips in an LLC registered under a friend's name, and transferred large bonuses into a trust account for his new fiancée, a woman I hadn't even known existed yet. That was the final gut punch. A fiancé. He was already planning another wedding while pretending to negotiate custody with me in good faith. Rachel asked for a brief recess after we filed the new evidence. Daniel's face turned a color I hadn't seen before, somewhere between white and ash. "You forged a prenup, committed tax fraud, and now this?" Rachel said coolly across the table. "You're lucky she's only asking for assets. I could have you arrested today." For a moment, he looked like he might collapse. But then, something else happened. He smiled. "None of this will matter if I lose everything," he muttered under his breath. "You'll still have nothing left of me, Maya." It was a threat disguised as martyrdom. But he was wrong. I didn't want what was left of him. I wanted the truth. And I already had it. That night, I sat on my back porch, glass of red wine in hand, and watched the lights of the city flicker below. I'd spent months preparing for this, collecting, planning, surviving. Now I was finally winning. But victory doesn't always feel like fireworks. Sometimes it feels like exhaustion, like silence. Like staring at a man you once loved and realizing he was a stranger the whole time. Still, there was more to come. The settlement would be decided soon. The federal investigation was just beginning. And the final move? That one was mine alone. I always thought that revenge would feel triumphant. Like fireworks exploding over a battlefield after the final victory. But sitting in the courtroom that morning, I realized it wasn't like that at all. It was cold. Quiet. Precise. I, Maya Brennan, once a loyal wife who sacrificed her career to raise 2 children and support a man's ambitions, was now the woman holding his future in her hands. And the courtroom knew it. The judge, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s who had shown little emotion during the proceedings, called us to order. Daniel was seated just 10 feet from me, but he felt a world away. His suit was still expensive, but his posture was slumped. The glint in his eye, the one he used to manipulate, dominate, and charm, had dulled into something desperate. My attorney Rachel stood beside me, calm and unflinching. We had everything. After months of discovery, forensic accounting, whistleblower tips, and legal maneuvering, we had built a case that painted Daniel not just as a liar, but as a man who had knowingly violated marital asset laws, laundered income through shell companies, and attempted to defraud both the IRS and me, the mother of his children. But the real weight came from timing. By now, the IRS had frozen several of his business accounts. His firm had lost 3 major clients. Civil suits were stacking up. The walls were closing in, and he knew it. The judge turned her gaze to Daniel. "Mr. Brennan, we've reviewed the new evidence presented, including the affidavit from your former accountant, and the offshore transaction records linked to the 3 LLCs. Do you dispute these claims?" Daniel's lawyer stood. "Your Honor, while my client does not admit to intentional wrongdoing, we are prepared to negotiate a revised settlement, acknowledging that the previous financial disclosures were incomplete." Incomplete. That was the word they were using now. Like a typo on a tax form. Rachel stood. "We're not interested in negotiation. We're asking for a court-ordered financial judgment, full asset disclosure, and retroactive spousal support, plus sole legal custody due to ongoing instability and demonstrated fraud." The judge nodded slowly. I felt Daniel stare. He was trying to read me, trying to find a crack, some trace of the woman who might still care. But I didn't flinch. This was the reckoning. After court recessed, I walked out into the sunlight feeling numb. Reporters waited outside, curious about the high-profile whispers surrounding Daniel's firm. I kept walking. I wasn't here for attention. Back home, the kids were at school. The house was quiet. I stood in the kitchen and stared at the dining table where we once hosted dinner parties, Daniel telling stories about investments, me smiling politely while my dreams sat on the back burner. That Maya was gone. Later that evening, Rachel called. His attorney reached out again. "They're practically begging now. They'll give you the house, full custody, a clean break with no contest, and even back pay support going 3 years." I stayed silent. "They're desperate to avoid criminal charges, Maya. But it's your call. If you want to press charges, the DA's office is willing to open an investigation." I hung up the phone and sat with the decision. Was I after justice? Or devastation? And what would that look like for my kids, 2 children already navigating a world where the man who once kissed them goodnight now stood at the edge of ruin? That night, I found Daniel waiting outside my house. I nearly called the police, but his body language was off. No threats. Just a slumped, defeated man standing beneath the porch light. "Just 5 minutes," he said quietly. "That's all I'm asking." I stepped outside, arms folded. "You have 5. He looked up at me, and for a brief moment, I saw the man I once loved, not the one who betrayed me, but the one who used to hold my hand during storms. "I lost," he said. "You got what you wanted." "No," I replied. "You still don't get it." "I didn't want to win. I wanted the truth to come out. I wanted you to stop pretending you were better than everyone you walked over." He exhaled slowly. "I'm not asking for forgiveness. I know that's gone. I needed you to know I never thought you'd fight back like this." I stepped closer. "That was your first mistake." He nodded. "I'll sign the settlement. Everything. Just leave the criminal part out. Don't take everything from me, Maya." I stared at him, quiet. He wasn't asking as a manipulator this time. He was asking as a man who had finally realized the damage he'd caused. And maybe that was the real revenge. Not destroying him, but making him live with everything he'd done. I turned and walked back inside. The door clicked shut behind me. The next morning, Rachel filed the settlement agreement with the court. Full asset division in my favor. Primary custody. Back support. The works. We didn't press criminal charges, for the kids. But I made one thing clear: if he ever threatened our children's well-being or broke the terms, I'd walk straight into the DA's office with a box of evidence labeled "just in case." He knew I meant it. By the end of the year, the house was officially mine. I opened a consulting business, something I'd always dreamed of before becoming a full-time wife and mother. The kids flourished. Therapy helped. And I started to laugh again, really laugh, with friends who had seen me through the storm. Daniel? He was a ghost in the business world now. A cautionary tale in certain circles. Occasionally, someone would send me a link to another article, another fallout. I never clicked. Because the truth is, I didn't need to watch the rest of his fall. I'd already risen. There's a strange silence that comes after a storm. Not the eerie kind that warns of more chaos, but the deep, steady kind that settles into your bones. That's what life felt like after everything ended with Daniel. Still. And for the first time in years, peaceful. It had been 6 months since the court officially ruled in my favor. 6 months since I stood in that courtroom and reclaimed my voice, my worth, my identity. Daniel signed the settlement. I got the house. The kids. The financial support he tried to hide. But more than that, I got myself back. My name is Maya Brennan, and I never imagined I'd be standing here, 38, divorced, a single mother, and somehow stronger than I ever was as a wife. In the beginning, after the divorce, I still found myself waking up at 4 a.m. out of habit. I used to wake early to make Daniel's coffee, iron his shirts, help with whatever last-minute crisis his firm had. Now, I'd sit in the kitchen alone, coffee in hand, journaling by the window. It wasn't sad. It was a reminder, I was finally living life for me. I turned the guest room into a home office. That consulting business I dreamed about? I launched it. Social media strategy and branding for small women-owned businesses. Clients came slowly at first, but word spread. A few of the women I met during my own legal battle became clients. Then referrals. Then partners. 6 months in, I had 3 long-term contracts and was mentoring younger entrepreneurs on Zoom. The woman who once spent her days picking out Daniel's cufflinks was now giving talks at women's empowerment panels. And damn, it felt good. The kids were adjusting, too. My daughter, Eliza, started middle school that fall. She began taking karate and made the honor roll. My son, Caleb, who had always been quiet and withdrawn, started therapy and slowly began to open up. One day he said something that made me cry in the grocery store aisle. "You're happier now, Mom. I like this version of you better." That moment made everything worth it. As for Daniel, well, he kept his distance. We co-parented via court-ordered scheduling apps and email only. No more late-night calls. No more surprise visits. He knew better now. He was still being investigated by the IRS for some of his financial gymnastics, but I didn't follow the updates. I had no desire to live in that world anymore. But life, as it tends to do, had one final twist for me. It was a Saturday morning in late October when I walked into a small bookstore downtown. They were hosting a local author signing, and I went mostly to support a friend. As I browsed the shelves, someone tapped my shoulder. It was Tom Carver, Daniel's old business partner, the one who'd resigned when things got messy, the one who had quietly tipped me off to Daniel's shell companies. "Hey, Maya," he said, awkward but kind. "I've been meaning to reach out. I'm starting a new venture, consulting for ethical investment firms. We need someone to lead branding and digital presence. Someone with guts. Someone with a story." I laughed. "I definitely have that. Can I take you to coffee and talk about it?" I hesitated for a moment, not because I was unsure of him, but because it reminded me how far I'd come. How different the old Maya was. The one who used to shrink next to Daniel's towering ego. But I nodded. "Yeah. I'd like that." We had coffee. And then a meeting. And a week later, I had a new contract, one that paid double what I had earned before, with complete creative control. This time, I wasn't a wife standing in the shadows of someone else's empire. I was building my own. One brick at a time. The thing people never tell you about surviving betrayal is that healing doesn't come all at once. It comes in quiet moments. In your child's laugh. In the way you sip your coffee with both hands. In the way your name sounds when you say it aloud and mean it. Maya Brennan. Not Daniel's wife. Not the scorned woman. Just Maya. Strong. Smart. Whole. In the end, I didn't need revenge to define me. I needed truth. I needed justice. And I needed the strength to walk away with my head high, even when I was shattered inside. Now, I look in the mirror and don't just see the survivor. I see the rebuilder. And trust me, she's just getting started.